the rebound.
All right, we're live.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for another CanJS Community Hangout. We have several CanJS developers with us today. I am a CanJS developer, Matthew.
Hey, man.
Everybody else,
Hey, Matthew.
everybody else want to introduce themselves?
And what they're talking about.
Yeah, and well, I was going to do that, but go ahead.
Sure, I guess I'll go. My name is Mark Moschel, and I'll be talking about how we use CanJS to change the front end of our Rails application.
Hi, I'm Jan, and I'm going to be talking about the cool new way to get help with CanJS.
The cool new way, okay. Specifically, how to ask good questions, right?
Yeah, that's the other part. Yep.
Yep. The other two people.
I'm Brian Moschel. I'm not going to be talking about anything, but I'm here for moral support.
And the last guy is Justin, who usually has no trouble talking, but is not talking right now.
Oh, I already said.
Oh, okay.
I was the first one to go. I will be asking I'll be showing at the end of this maybe how to produce CanJS's documentation.
Yeah, sweet. Awesome. Okay, so I guess let's start with you, Mark. You did say how we changed our Rails application. Are you allowed to say who we and who our is, or is that a secret?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my company is called Factor 75. When I started this, I was actually with a development shop, so we were Big Astronaut, and there was a team of us. And then in the middle of the project, it switched, and some things happened. It was just me finishing it.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, if you want to go ahead and explain what.
Yeah, sure. Here, should I share screen?
You should be able to share a screen.
Okay. Okay. So I threw this together quickly, but if you have any questions along the way, just stop and let me know. So we have a site called Factor 75. It's a meal delivery site, and we were built in Rails, and it had been touched by a lot of people. And at some point, we decided we wanted to do a redesign, and wanted to redo specifically the menu and the checkout, and wanted to use updated technologies. And so we were thinking about what frameworks to be using, and we decided upon CanJS. And so this is what we were trying to make it look like. And so we were going from a kind of a hacked together solution here that had a lot of different AJAX calls to a new solution here where hopefully we could modularize different components and make it a lot more reusable in the future and easier to maintain. And so
I think I'm going to be hungry at the end of this hangout.
that's one of my goals here, is to make you all very hungry.
Oh man, she's so good.
So we wanted this. So this is a component here on the left, and then we have the menu component. Each of these would be its own component as well. And then we have the nav bar and the cart with a couple components in there. So really trying to break it apart.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no, please.
What you say is on the left. What is component? Kind of the whole thing, the whole like description, add the cart. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the selected meal. So when you select a meal here from the menu, that would be its own kind of identity or component here on the left side.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
So when we were thinking about how we wanted to actually structure this, for better or for worse, we decided early on that we were going to not move everything. We weren't going to break it apart into two separate apps. And looking back, that probably would have been a much better way to do it, but we wanted to just move the home page, the menu page, and the checkout page at first, and then move other pages later on as needed. And so we couldn't break them up into two separate applications, and so we had to put the CanJS components within the Rails asset pipeline. And so we stored those scripts here in assets JavaScript, and we just created a new folder for the F75 CanJS modules. And so we have a components folder and a models folder, and then a couple other files that help set things up. And in Rails, Rails automatically precompiles whatever defined in your application JS file. And so it's in here that we define all the different dependencies. We've got
What do you,
jQuery, can.
what do you
Go
mean
ahead.
by precompiled? Is it concat these all together? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it can catch these all together.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so this is where we have all of the, you can see the models tree and the components tree. So all of our logic and all of our files are defined here. And so the way we set it up, we have an app state that was something we didn't have at first. We realized the need for it. So our app state just defines a user, a cart, and a list of cart items. And that is, whenever a change is made to any of these objects, it gets propagated up and spread out throughout all of the different components, which makes the live binding a lot easier to work with. And we map that to the CAN route, so those so that data is always available. And then we have an analytics tracker, which is just a CAN control, and a mobile analytics track or a mobile CAN control for a little bit of changes that are required for the mobile aspect of it. And then one thing that we noticed is we had to implement a little bit of a hack, a routing hack, to make it work with Rails. So whenever we were changing from a non-CAN, if we were on a non-CanJS page, it was trying to pick up, it was trying to use CanJS routing so the page wouldn't reload. So we had to do a little hack where if we're on a non-CanJS page or if we're going to a non-CanJS page, we have to stop the propagation and ignore CanJS routing. That would allow the page to actually reload like it needs to for Rails. Otherwise, if we're on a CanJS page and we're going to a CanJS page, then we could just proceed as normal. We don't need any of this, and it works just fine. So that was kind of one thing that we got stuck on early on in the process. And then, so the way we set up routing, we have our CanJS routing, our app. We initialize the page here with this ID F75 app, and then we set route bindings a little bit further below, where it just looks at the page and then loads the appropriate content for the nav bar in the page. And we use CoffeeScript, by the way, so which is why it looks a little bit funky. And then in Rails, we have to set up the Rails route so that each of our CanJS pages point back to this meals index. And meals index is just a controller and a method in Rails that points to the Rails view, and the only thing that's in that view is this div with the initial F75 app ID.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we have the routes set up, and this was just an example. So when we go to checkout, yeah, that routing sets are the separate nav bar and the separate page. And then authentication. Someone else actually built this, so I didn't have my hands in this too much, but we have a pre-filter, and before we send any requests, we check if there's an auth token stored in a cookie, and we send that along with the request. And then in the Rails, in the actual controller, before we do anything, we check to make sure that that auth token is there, and that the user is currently signed in before we proceed with whatever action needs to be taken. So that was, I think, most of the presentation. I was going to just walk through one component, but if you have any questions, let me know.
I mean, how are you? I was going to ask, how are you interacting when between the CAN and the Rails? Like, I mean, you're just communicating to like an API via models, or do you not do that?
Yeah. So, yep. So here's, I'll show it as an example through this component. So this is our cart here, and this is one of the cart items that's currently in my cart. So when I come in here and I change this, change the quantity, what we're happening here, so that's, let's see, CAN entered, so it's bound to the save new quantity method here on the scope, and so in here we update the quantity of the cart item, and then we save it. and so that's defined in the model, the cart item model, and so that sends a post request to our API, and we have our API cart items controller. Great, so it gets picked up here, and it finds that meal option, either updates it or adds a new cart item, and then saves it. And so that's how we interact between our front end and the Rails server.
Can you show that Rails code again?
Yeah.
Cart item controller.
This right here.
Right. So is this? I guess I don't know Rails well enough, but this seems pretty simple. Do you find that the process of doing this is like simplified your Rails code?
Yeah. So one thing that's been really nice is it's forced us to redefine a lot of our controllers. So before, since all the views were all in Rails as well, controllers were starting to get very large and messy. Well, I was separating them out, and we're accessing them through this API. We're trying to be more. We have an opportunity to redo how we were doing it and make them a lot more RESTful, and simplify them whenever possible.
Were you able to take advantage of that? Do you reuse that service anywhere for other apps or other use cases?
This component?
No, do you reuse the REST layer, like the cart service, for example?
Well, so right now the website is the only thing accessing it accessing the API, but it gives us obviously opportunities in the future to use it in different ways, or build a mobile app of some sort that would use it as well. Is that what you were asking?
Cool. Yeah.
So that's how that's done. And yeah, it just made it really simple. This component we happen to only be using in this location, but some of the other components we've been able to reuse. Just built a new purchase page and was able to reuse all our credit card, their credit card components, and was able to get that done in just half a day. So a lot of that modular code and component, moving things into components, has made quite a big difference actually in development time and maintenance.
Awesome. So you want to walk through like one component that you worked on? Is that
Sure.
what you were going to do when I interrupted you?
Yeah, no worries. It kind of let me do that in a sense anyways. But yeah, so this cart item is one of the components I was talking about before. And so that's just this here. And this is reused every time we add.
So what are you passing into that cart item? The cart object or cart model?
What we're passing in here is, yeah, it's a product, or a meal option is what we call it. It's passed in. And so that's one of these, whatever you selected here. So that product gets passed in, display some of its data, show the image, have a couple forms here that are tied to different methods in the JavaScript file, like the save new quantity that we showed before, or the destroy. And then that data is bound to the app state, and so when we destroy a cart item, for example, it updates the cart item list, which updates the count up here and is used in a couple of other places as well. That fortunately from this component we don't have to worry about any of that. It just kind of handles it for us with live binding. So yeah, so that's at a very high level what we did to move from Rails to CanJS for a lot of our functionality.
Awesome. Well, thanks for telling us about it. Do you see yourselves, are you going to continue on this process in other pages?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually moved quite a bit of the app now. The only pages that remain in Rails are the admin pages. So I just finished moving all our account pages and everything. You can see it, if you remember from the checkout page, it's all the same components that are just reused. So this was very easy and very quick. It's much faster now. There's no page reloads, and it's all bound to the same app state, so it reloads really fast.
Are you guys having to deal with SEO at all for any of these pages that you've done?
Yeah. So SEO was kind of a challenge in the beginning. We looked into a bunch of different options. The one we ended up going with was called pre-render. I think I know there's probably options we could have built something ourselves, but we just spent a little bit of money, let pre-render handle it all for us.
Pre-render is just does the it like will process the JavaScript and create your pages for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you see a preview of what they've generated?
I think so. I haven't looked at it in a while, but they're supposed to, anytime a page is accessed, cache it and store it. I don't even know if I remember my login.
This is live, you know.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll have to check it later. But yeah, so pre-render is one option. There was a handful of others we looked into as well. It was that was definitely a challenge at the beginning. We were very scared about having SEO get hit pretty hard when we switched over.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Feel free to stick around and comment on other things if you wish.
Definitely will.
But now we're going to move over to Jan, and Jan's going to tell us how to ask good questions when you're asking for support.
Whoa, you look like a younger version of Brian. That's so weird. Like smaller, younger, more attractive version of Brian.
Definitely more attractive, yeah.
Are you related somehow? I mean, it's crazy it's striking how similar you guys look.
Well, I shaved yesterday. Otherwise, we would have looked a lot more alike.
Hey, Matthew, can you turn on the Q&A? I think we forgot to.
I don't.
I try to turn it on. It's not. Once it starts, if it's not on, it's not.
Oh, yeah. There's something about that.
Hit us up in, what's it called, IRC, if you have a question.
Yeah, that's good. All right, take it, Jan.
Alrighty. So I'm going to be talking about Stack Overflow today. We're actually moving all of our question-oriented support from the forums to Stack Overflow. Forums will still be around for a while, but we will eventually be using Stack Overflow for the questions and forums for things like discussions and sharing things and that sort of thing. But yeah, so today I'm going to talk about how to ask a good question on Stack Overflow so you can get a good answer from us and other members of the community. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Stack Overflow, it's a question and answer site specifically for getting answers to practical, detailed questions. So you have a very specific question or a real-world problem that you've had to deal with, and you can ask about it on Stack Overflow, and it's an expert-oriented site where people can answer that question. And you can find out more about that in Stack Overflow's help pages. StackOverflow.com/tour is a good place to start if you don't know anything about it. But the really nice thing about this is instead of getting in situations where support is sort of one-off, one-on-one things, questions can become reused over time and other people can benefit from problems that everybody faces. So in that regard, I'm going to be talking about how to ask a good question, and of course, this could be a very long discussion, but I'm just going to hit on 3 quick things that if you just focus on doing those 3 things well, you'll be great at asking questions on Stack Overflow, better than average. So first thing is reusability, and once again, Stack Overflow help pages have a lot more about this, but I'm just going to sort of talk about the minimal effective dose to make you, to help you ask really good questions. So why reusability? Of course, the obvious answer is so we can reuse questions. If you make sure that you think about how other people will read your question, how other people could get something else out of your problem, could see it again in the future, obviously, tautologically, it's going to be more reusable. But the thing that is maybe less obvious is that you're going to get better answers. As soon as you start thinking about how other people read your question, someone who's trying to answer your question is going to be able to give you a lot better answer. They're going to be able to answer it faster, probably in more detail, and hit exactly the right thing you want to. And also in the longer term, I know that I should write a reusable question so other people can read it later. If you have a question right then, that's like, well, why should I have to do that? But in the long term, if everybody does this, you won't always have to put the time into asking a question. So eventually, of course, you'll search for the problem you're having, and there will already be a question, and somebody else has solved it. You don't have to do all that work to figure it out. So first one was reusability. The other thing to think about is what exactly is your problem, and just like easiest way to get much better at identifying your problem is write your title last. I don't know if anybody writing essays feels like if you sort of wait a little bit on your thesis statement or wait on a title for a blog post, that sort of thing, your title can reflect your question a lot better. But besides the title, besides figuring out your title, I'd say the quickest way to figure out what exactly your problem is start with a search. Search for your problem on Stack Overflow, and you might actually find an answer to it. Sometimes you will. But if you don't, looking for other problems that are related to it, they're going to help you figure out what's different about yours. So then when you ask your question, you can link to those related questions.
Hey.
Sorry?
I don't know if this is a real search page or if you just drew this, but is doing the CanJS in brackets like that, does that make it use the CanJS tag?
Yes. So if you put something in brackets in the Stack Overflow search, it'll turn that into a tag. That's just a quick shortcut for that. So even if you don't end up linking to related questions in your question, finding related questions is going to help you figure out what makes your problem different from other people's problems. And I would say, when in doubt, if nothing else, this is what you should be asking yourself when you're trying to ask a question on Stack Overflow. What is unique about your problem? Because that's the thing that you're going to want to focus on. And that sort of feeds into the third thing, that if you focus on creating better code examples, you're going to get a lot better answers on Stack Overflow, a lot more detailed answers. And this gets covered very much in detail at stackoverflow.com/help/MCVE. That stands for Minimal Complete Verifiable Examples. So going over that, a minimal code example, it has just enough information in it. I'm sure for anybody who spent a lot of time on Stack Overflow, you encounter a lot of questions that are like, I have a homework problem is actually really common. I have a homework problem. Here is many lines of code. What do I do? And those rarely get a good detailed answer, if any answer at all. So you want to focus on getting just enough information. And the best way to do that for finding and writing your code example is to start from scratch. Don't just try to copy and paste a bunch of lines of code from an app you've been writing. Try and separate it out from the app and write just the code that's breaking and try to isolate that problem in your example. And this is where some debugging skills come in handy. So one of the big ones, of course, is divide and conquer, where you take different chunks of your app and you break down where the problem could be. So you cut it in half, you bisect the problem. Brian was actually really helpful in teaching me this debugging skill. And then you just, over time, break it down into smaller chunks until you find the small chunk that your problem is in. So when you're putting a code example on Stack Overflow, try and break it down as small as you can before you actually start just pasting code. And that link there is a really long and thorough blog post on how to use debugging skills to create good code examples. So once you've found the sort of smallest reproducible part of code, then you can start thinking about complete. A lot of people do this backwards. They don't want to leave anything out. They don't want to miss something that's crucial to solving the problem. But once you've isolated it, then focus on your code example and your question being complete. And a big thing there is don't forget to describe the actual problem. Pasting code and saying this doesn't work is really difficult to figure out what a good answer will be. So treat it sort of like you would with writing a test case. What's your expected result? What is your actual result? What should happen? And once again, complete comes after minimal. And the third thing is code examples should be verifiable. And the easiest way to do this, well, I'd say the best way to do this, is to link to a JS fiddle. I would not always put every last line of code in a question, but when you've isolated your code into the chunks that you're trying to ask your question about, actually put it into a JS fiddle, run it, make sure that it's breaking the way you expect it to. I've actually seen quite a few people post some code on Stack Overflow and the problem was elsewhere, and the so-called broken code is working totally fine. So this is a good way to, first off, make sure that it's breaking the way you expect. And the thing that helps someone trying to answer your question with, they can take that JS fiddle and they can try different answers to different solutions to your problem, and then if you have your verifiable problem, they can have a verifiable solution for you, instead of having a back and forth, try this, no, that didn't work, try that. Yeah, so, and we'll always have an up-to-date JS fiddle linked on the CanJS tag wiki. So if you go to stackoverflow.com, tags CanJS info, we'll always have a JS fiddle ready to go for you there to just drop in some CanJS code. So yeah, so the three things, once again, were minimal, complete, verifiable, and overall, if you focus on thinking about how other people will read your question, writing it for maximum reusability, you're going to get better answers. It's going to be easier for us and other members of the community to answer your question. And yeah, that's about all I've got. Everything that I linked to, all of the Stack Overflow resources that I linked to in the slides, if you go to bit.ly/so-canjs, then they're in a bundle there for further reading.
Awesome, thank you. You know, most of what you said can also be applied to filing CanJS bugs as well. So yeah, it's definitely applicable in other places. Yeah.
Oh, and that's actually, so one thing I did forget to mention earlier with the reproducibility or the reusability. So you don't always have to ask the question. The other side of this is one of the reasons we're moving to Stack Overflow is it'll be easier for us to track the problems that a lot of people have. So if questions about a topic get asked a lot, we can see that. If a question gets upvoted a lot, we can see that. And that'll help us improve our documentation.
And how will it help us know if a question is being asked a lot compared to just going through all the questions?
Not a specific question as much as there are a lot of routing questions on Stack Overflow, and we do have some tags that we do have tags for different CanJS features. So if we see a lot of routing questions, then
so we should be encouraging people to tag it with what kind of rule they're having problems with.
Yes, yeah. The other thing is even if there's not a specific question being asked a lot of the time if a question gets a lot of upvotes, means a lot of people are reading that. Maybe a lot of people didn't find something in the documentation. And so this is a really good way, if everybody focuses on asking questions that'll be useful to future people, then we have a tool where we can improve our documentation without without a community member, for instance, having to file a pull request to write documentation themselves.
Very cool. Well, thanks again, Jan. I don't think you mentioned, I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, but every time someone asks a question on Stack Overflow, the CanJS core contributors get notified. So ask questions there. Now I guess we have a little bit of time. Justin, you want to talk about creating documentation for CanJS? Or do you not want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. We're about to release the next, we just released an alpha of Steel.js about 2 months ago, and now we're getting ready to release the next alpha of Document.js. Let me share my screen real quick. So just to get it at a high level, because I don't have the grunt task working totally yet, but I have the normal standalone. So you can go to documentjs.com, and there's some kind of most of the internal APIs are all filled out. There's a little bit on how you can install and configure document.js. And document.js is what we're using to kind of produce all of our documentation. The cool thing about document.js is that, well, besides supporting, I think there's like 3 really good things. The first thing is that you can use Google Closure annotations to describe your method signatures and things like that. To give an example, like in CanJS, you can compute, or actually I think even the mustache stuff is the coolest on this. So like a mustache register helper, the function that you pass it, I can kind of click to, and then I've described the function, and that has options that you can click through too. So you can very well describe like accurately and tersely the shape of something that you're trying to document. And that looks like, there's this example. Show how we do it in CanJS. There is view, mustache. So I can define like the options argument to a mustache helper. So this is helper options. And I can use the mustache helper, like these are types defined themselves. I can define each option, or I can define it with like a lot of different, the hat.
Justin, I think we're not seeing your screen actually. Oh. You're sharing your screen, but I think you need to make yours the visible one.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Thank you. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Next time, warn me a little earlier. This happens a lot because I guess I'm controlling the screen down there.
I was able to see it.
Oh. Yeah, we were all able to see it, but
not everybody else. Okay.
Yeah, everybody else.
Let me start over. So the new document.js is up, or it's about to be up. Hopefully, end of today. I'll kind of really get an alpha release of this, that you can install it, and all the docs are kind of there. As good as they are, probably even better than Steel's. Definitely more comprehensive of its internal APIs than Steel's, so you can use document.js. And what I was going to say is, on a high level, I think there's 3 nice things about document.js. The first is because it supports this terse Google Closure annotations, allows you to kind of very tersely and specifically define the behavior of a function, an object, anything. The next thing is it supports multi-version documentation. You guys have hopefully all seen this on CanJS. And then the final thing is just like how insanely themable it is. You can really do whatever you want to it, and relatively easy. You can quickly overwrite the templates that it uses, the style and JavaScript it uses in a pretty nice way. So I'm going to go through, give a little bit more information about that, show how we're using it to do CanJS documentation. So what I mean by the terse syntax is you can see, a lot of things relate to other things in a complex application, right? And what I was talking about is how there's a really complex thing of like, can mustaches register helper? And everything that a helper function might take as an argument, and actually it takes an options object, and that options object has things on it as well, and you want to be able to describe all of this stuff and have it relate to each other. And I was giving an example of the register helper, right? We want to be able to describe the function it takes, and the function it takes an options, and the options each have like these FN methods, inverse methods, things like that. And you want to be able to build up these structures and document them to your users. So I was going to give an example of how you do that, and I'll start with a section renderer. This is what, when you call options.fn, this is describing one of those functions. This is a type definition, because this isn't an object you can call. It's typically something that is supplied or generated for you. well, I guess you can call it, but it's a type definition. It isn't actually defining like a structured like object as part of CanJS initially. So I can say, hey, a section renderer takes an optional scope or any object and kind of describe the rules for that. And the second argument to a section renderer is it takes anything or an options kind of scope-like object called helpers. Now these things, this is a section renderer. I can use that to define what FN and inverse are, right, on the options, helper options object. That's the options object that a mustache helper gets called with, right? These are each section renderers.
So those are functions, right?
Yeah, these are functions. Right? They're types of functions.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can have the hash object, define that as a object that has a string property that is any value, a string or a number. And the context and so forth, I can describe everything as, this type def is really nice. I can describe everything that would be on a helper options object. And then I can use then a helper options object in register helper. So where is helper maybe? Yes. So here is a helper. I can describe what this is going to be in the option, the argument. There's like a undetermined number of arguments, and then there's the actual options object. So this is a type def for the type of function that you call register with.
So is the optional arguments in front and the section objects is in the end? Is that what that's doing?
What?
I said, does that mean that the optional arguments are in the front and the section arguments is the last parameter?
The section that options argument is the last parameter. Yes.
Right. Okay. But you could do the opposite.
Yes, you can do the
opposite. Right.
But my point is, what I was trying to get is this first nice thing is it just allows you to have this very nice hierarchy. So register helper has, actually I'm not exactly sure where register helper is. Oh, it's in mustache.js. So that's where that's documented. So I keep going to it. Where is it? There's too many examples of it. Okay, so register helper's documentation itself uses that function as it uses that helper function type def as one of its parameters. So to me, this is really nice. I mean, this is a way so you can be very specific about the behavior. Now, this again isn't great for guides, but I think it's very great for API documentation. So I can say, this is the behavior of one of these functions that gets passed in. It has its own documentation. Then it can go down into the options object, which can then go down into the actual renderer function and what it does. And you don't have to describe all the behavior of all of that just in this high-level function. You can easily allow people to jump to the specific thing that they want to find. So that's benefit, I think, number one of Document.js. The second thing is just that it supports this multi-versioned documentation, which is apparently broken right now. Oh, it's because a register helper doesn't exist in the same spot. So let's find something that exists for all time.
It would be nice, Justin, if that was like intercepted by a node wildcard routing service or something that just redirected you back to the homepage of that version.
Well, you could just have a 404 do that. It doesn't, you could have a 404 take you to wherever you want. If the page doesn't exist, it doesn't need to be intercepted.
So I have a question, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
We've had multiple versions of the CanJS docs before. How does the new Document.js make that easier?
That's a perfect segue into what I was just about to explain. So here's my old Document.js. So the new, let's take a look at what CanJS is. It's a little bit hairier than most people would start with. It's only because we have documentation that didn't support this new version documentation. But in a grunt file or in a document.js.json, you can have you specify which versions you want to download. This is in CanJS.com's repository. It'll actually go to this repository, download it, and then use these rules to generate documentation with what it downloads inside here. So it'll go download CanJS 1.1 branch, and it will create two kind of different pages, the docs pages and the guides pages. From the docs pages, it will, if there isn't a pattern, it'll just pretty much grab everything with Markdown and JavaScript. So this is going to, but it'll ignore everything in the guides, and it'll ignore everything in Node and Bower. And then for the guides, I want everything in the guides plus like the top level Markdown. And I do the same thing for 2.0. For 2.1, 2.1 is going to currently contains its own document.js.json file. So it doesn't need to be configured because it configures itself. So you can just list it like that. And then I can have other, for the home page and stuff like that, I've just got a lot of other like data I want to pass each page. I specified that for multi-version now is you just list your versions, it'll download them and document them for you. And you can also tell it like, I want to document a specific version. So if I did grunt 2.1, an error because it's breaking right now. The grunt one is this would work. So then the final thing was just the theming. Just a little talk about that real quick. For CanJS.com, if we want to change the theming, there's this theme, and we can include any JavaScript files we want in here, and just make sure that we're like essentially you can use AMD now because it's using the new steel, and you can have templates that overwrite the base templates. So I want the layout to look a little bit different. I can just copy, make things happen in my own layout. And CanJS is a very different menu structure than the default menu structure, so I can overwrite them how the menu lays itself out. And the nice thing now is all of this stuff is well documented, especially the overwriting and the template stuff. This all happens in an HTML generator. You can see all the helpers you use and things like that. They're available to the templates. So in the end, the way that you're really just going to have to work on the documentation is just run this grunt document.js. If you want to document just one part of the documentation, you can write the version you want to document. And if you want to not have to download it every time you want to point at a local repository, I can point at CanJS like that. And this is how, instead of going and downloading what 2.1 is pointing at, it'll just use this local CanJS repository next to it as the source for 2.1's documentation. And this is nice because I think it allows you to document you can just come brand new to the project, never have run it before, and just run document.js, and it'll download everything and build it, which that takes some time. But if you just want to quickly iterate, you can just point it to a local copy, so it won't have to download every time. Also, there's watches supported now, so you can just set up a watch, change your files, in your local CanJS, and it will regenerate the site every time. So it should make documentation a lot easier. I hope to put up some, like a video or something how to run this to produce CanJS's site, so it's easier for people to edit the documentation, which means we'll get better documentation contributed by the community. That's the dream. So that's all I have.
Very cool. So I'm getting CanJS.com to use this. Is it using it now, or is that something that's coming soon?
I've got it. I want to get it integrated with Grunt, and then it will. So I've got all the bugs fixed if you're generating document.js from command line, but I want it to work from Grunt so that document.js is what creates the 2.1 and 1.1 folders, and we need Daco is supposed to run once it's put CanJS in its spot. So I need to get the grunt file working. So once I get grunt working, yeah, I'm hopefully tonight, the new CanJS.com will be using this version.
Yeah, I had a question for Jan that I never got to ask. Jan, when people ask a Stack Overflow question, is that, I think that's currently tied to points in GitHub, isn't it?
Yeah, it's worth, I think, the same as a forum post right now. Though I think pulling in upvotes is like a future thing. I don't think that feature exists yet.
Cool.
But yeah, so asking questions and answering things can get you points on GitHub.
Earn you free stuff. Swag.
All right, well, I guess that's all we have for this week. We'll be back at the same time next week for more CanJS goodness.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep, thanks a lot,
Thanks,
Mark.
guys. That was fun.
All right, bye.